Welcome back to the Automation Podcast. My name is Sean Tierney with Insights in Automation, and I want to thank you for tuning in. In this episode, I meet up with Steve Mustard to talk about a new book he just co-authored about operational technology risks. Everything from cybersecurity and so much more. We have a great conversation. I hope you guys enjoy this, and I will put a link to his new book in the description. That said, I wanted to talk to you members about the Compact Logix 5390. I just released a members-only video. Now, if you're not a member, it starts at just $5 a month. And this is the fifth video I've released just for members this year, and it goes through all of the details in the slide deck for the Compact Logix 5390. So check that out. I also hope to get Rockwell on the show to talk about it in depth as well. Now, with that said, I also want to tell you guys about a training class I'm having in 3 weeks. Most of the students have chosen either the Micro 800 or the Compact Logix to learn on. And you might be saying, Sean, how do you teach two different programmable controllers at the same time? Well, in the training room, I have stations for 8 people, right? And typically, if we're doing all Compact Logix, I'll do presentations in there on Compact Logix, or if we're doing all Micro 800, I'll do that as well. Or if it's a custom course for a customer, I've had a lot of customers ask me to train them on PLC 5, 6500, old panel views, new panel views. And so I do that type of custom training as well. But when we have a mixed group from different companies learning on different PLCs, I'll put a picture up on the screen here. I actually do the lectures in my office. You can see that conference room table there. I have enough room in there for 5 students at a time. So, if we had 5 students doing one PLC and 3 doing another, that would still work out because I can just do the lectures right in my office. And of course, when I'm not doing the lectures, I'm in the lab room helping the students go through the labs. But with that said, if you know anybody who needs that kind of basic to intermediate type of PLC training on the MicroLogix, on Compact Logix, and other PLCs, you'll see that all up at theautomationschool.com/live. Just reach out to me directly. All my contact info is at the top of that site. Now, with that said, let's go ahead and jump into this episode of the Automation Podcast. Steve, thank you for coming back on the Automation Podcast. It's great to have you back on. I always enjoy talking to you about all things industrial automation and OT related. And today we're having you back on to talk about your new book. But before we get to that, maybe for some of those folks who haven't seen our previous episodes together, could you give us a quick introduction to who you are?
Sure. And thanks, Sean, again for the opportunity to talk. Always great to talk to you too. My name's Steve Mustard. I'm an industrial automation consultant specializing in cybersecurity. I've been working in instrumentation and control and real-time embedded systems for almost 40 years now. And I'm originally from the UK, based in Houston, Texas now. I've been working in various sectors: water, wastewater, oil and gas, food and beverage, transportation, all over the world. And I am also a volunteer with the International Society of Automation. I was the 2021 Society president, and I do instruction in cybersecurity for them. And I work with other organizations around the world in terms of supporting them in cybersecurity education.
Yeah, and thank you for that intro. You just reminded me, and I want to mention to the audience, I was invited to speak at there's a session coming up in Tampa that I was invited to speak at, along with some other people you folks may know. So check that out. I know there's a lot of big names that are sponsoring that. Some integrators I've worked with in the past, and so on. So please, if you're in the Tampa area in May, late May, mid to late May, check that out. I've shared it on LinkedIn, so you can find more information about it there. But in any case, back to why you're here today. Can you tell us a little bit about this new book you're writing? I know we talked to you previously about digital twins. Still love that conversation. I have not gotten through that 2 volume set though; it's pretty thick. But this is a new book you're co-authoring, I believe. Tell us about it. What's the title? Let's start with that.
This is a book about risk management in OT systems, operational technology. The idea of the book came from a collaboration I've been doing with Bob Landvanovsky. Many people who in industrial cybersecurity will be familiar with that name. He's a very well-known, very experienced, seasoned professional in the critical infrastructure protection. He's been doing that for decades now. He's based in the US too, and I asked him to review one of my previous books, and he provided some really excellent comments and through that, we established a good friendship and relationship. And the idea came about to talk about how we could write a book together. And one of the things that I'm really passionate about with cybersecurity is the risk management part. I'm passionate about it because if you do risk management well, then cybersecurity is done well. And if you don't do it well, then you create all kinds of problems. Either you don't have very good cybersecurity protections, or you spend a lot of money and you don't achieve the benefit. So I talked to him about that, and we both agreed that was an interesting subject. So we decided to write a book together. So usual process, it takes about probably about a year, in terms of writing a book like this, collaborating especially. We spent many weeks talking to each other about different drafts, and we finally got to the end. So it's about to be published next month.
Well, that's awesome, and that you guys were able to collaborate on this. And let's dive into the content of the book. So, I'm intrigued by the title because whether people know it or not, our plant floors are connected to other networks, whether we like it or not. Now, I'm sure there's some people out there said, I made sure my network is not interconnected, and that's great. But in a lot of cases, the surety there is not that well understood. Even sometimes when we're using our mobile devices to connect with like a lot of products have NFC, but a lot of products have Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. And that is a vector for a security breach. And a lot of times we don't think of it. We think of our mobile devices as standalone devices, but they're connected to the biggest network in the world, right? And so it's important for us to be thinking about cybersecurity, risk management, and all these things that are happening on our network. And I think a lot of times too, when we talk about risk management, we're talking about things beyond cybersecurity as well. So why don't you help us drill in and like what are some of the key topics you cover in this book? Maybe give us an introduction of like the key bullet points of what will be covered, maybe some of the chapters.
Yep. No, what you said there, you covered a lot of the objective of writing this book. So, starting with the last part you said about understanding that risk is beyond just the cybersecurity part. That's a big part of the reason why we wrote this book, because people will talk about risk and risk management when they talk about cybersecurity, but honestly, when you delve into their understanding of it, they actually don't know what you mean by risk. So, what I mean by that is they'll talk about vulnerabilities, so flaws in hardware and software that are patched by vendors, and they'll talk about risk there. But that's a part of risk, but that's not risk. You could have vulnerabilities in your products, like a PLC, for instance. You've got a Control Logics PLC, and it's a certain firmware version, and that firmware version has a number of known vulnerabilities. That doesn't mean you have a risk necessarily. You have a risk, but it might not be a severe risk. The other thing they'll talk a lot about is threats. So we'll talk about nation states, especially in today's climate. They'll talk about nation states attacking infrastructure, and they'll talk about that. That's a element of risk too, but it's not the only thing that you should focus on. And so what happens, I think, is that we either get too obsessed with the nation states and what they might do, or we get obsessed with patching things and having software to detect vulnerabilities, but we don't really get to the bottom of what you hinted at in your introduction, which is the risks that operational systems have. They're much broader than that, and in a lot of times, actually much simpler than that. So the examples you gave about someone using their phone, and that phone is connected to maybe the operational network, and it's also at the same time connected to the internet. You're inadvertently creating this vector, as you say, in from the internet, the untrusted network, into your trusted network, and you don't realize that. That's a simple thing, but that's the thing that's going to be more likely to cause the problem than Iran, for instance, targeting some production facility, right? Now, I'm not saying that's not an issue, but what we try to do in this book is say, let's think about what all the risks are and then rank those risks accordingly and say, understand that you can manage some risks to reduce your overall risk significantly, and it doesn't necessarily have to cost a lot of money. So you have better procedures in place, and you have better, tighter controls on what people can and can't do. And you do the basic things, like you have a backup in place for all of your software and you have incident response plans in place. If you have a lot of these basic things, you can recover from a cybersecurity incident such that it's a minor inconvenience rather than a major outage that we've heard about in the news. So the book starts with explaining, well, obviously we've got to introduce what operational technology is, just in case people don't know all of that. Then we talk about an important part, which is misunderstanding risk, the thing that I keep referring to. This is a big part of the book is let's understand what we really mean by risk. And if you understand what you mean by risk, then you can manage it better. Then we talk about how you can measure that. So measuring risk, risk is a combination of how likely something is to happen and how severe it is when it does happen. They're the most important parts of risk. That applies to safety and it also applies to cybersecurity. So understanding how you can work out what the impact is an important measure, and how you understand how likely something is important. Then we talk about all the different frameworks and processes that you have. So there's many ways you can do risk assessment and risk management. And we don't prescribe a method because you shouldn't prescribe a method. In fact, the ISA standard 62443 does not say this is how you do risk management. What it says is you should have a risk management procedure and process. And in many cases, your organization will have one already. And so you basically apply that to cybersecurity. So we talk about all of the different options you've got. Then, because of the way technology is changing, we talk about the new risks that are coming up. So you touched on a few. The technology has changed dramatically. We've gone from isolated systems to connected systems to sharing information from control systems to enterprise systems to people with mobile devices and Wi-Fi and LoRaWAN and Zigbee and all of these other kind of communication technologies that have come in. They're already here and they're already creating additional concerns in terms of risk. But then, of course, we've got AI. You can't have any kind of webinar or podcast without mentioning AI these days. And of course, AI is becoming a significant part of some operational environments as well. And so we've also got cloud computing, edge computing, some of the things we've talked about before. And they are also introducing new issues into operational environments. So we have to think about not only are we not secure today, but we're also now adding more complexity and more issues that are going to create further risks. So that's a concept.
Well,
Then we talk
just
about. Oh
go
yeah,
ahead.
good.
Yeah, let me jump in because you've talked about so much already. I want to just reflect back on you some of this stuff. First of all, so some of you people might be listening and saying, "Why do you have to explain operational technology?" But I think that is so important because it may be somebody in the front office who's a
Yep.
accountant, right? Or it's a maybe a C-level type person. They may have came from some other industry. We see this
Yep.
happen all the time, especially on the C level. They come from other industries. They may not know a lot about manufacturing. And so, and as well as policymakers. So I think it was so great that you guys did that, opened the book with that. And I know many of us are thinking, I don't need anybody to explain that to me, but you want the book to be helpful to people who have come from outside of this industry, right? The process of manufacturing. The other thing I wanted to say on that too is, and I'm not going to name any countries, but I think we all know if you're watching the news, which countries we would be concerned about this week. But in any case, and I don't want to belittle the fact that maybe some bad actors in our country may do things to other countries as well, because we know that's the case. Those people get caught and arrested all the time if you're paying attention to the not just the front page. But in any case, my wife's a principal, and the state decided they would send her a notice saying that if anybody had this particular brand of PLC or PAC, that they should be careful because our enemies overseas may want to exploit these vectors. And I think it was NERC. They had these different listings on there. But that goes back to your point. Like, okay, so this just happened 2 weeks ago. I still have it in my inbox. So people in government are getting these messages saying, hey, there could be a vector that could, and maybe more on the government side than on industry side, right? But my point is on that is like you said, like what is your risk there, right? So I know back in the day, I had a power company. They were very upset. There was this new advisory. And so I started reading it and they said, if you if you want to access the web page for your PLC's Ethernet card and somebody, because of a bug on that web page, somebody could deny you access to that with a DDoS attack,
Mhm.
and you won't be able to pull up your Ethernet card's web page. And I'm like, wow, like nobody ever looks at that web page anyways. It didn't, and it specifically said did not affect the IO or SCADA communications, just denied you. So we got to put these things in perspective. What is the risk of that? Now, to me, I immediately said, if you have somebody doing a DDoS attack on the web page on your Ethernet module, you have some serious problems because what if they did something, worse, right? Like generate random SIP packets and confuse the controllers or Profinet packets or whatever network you're on, Modbus TCP. And no, especially how open Modbus TCP is, right? Man, you could do all kinds of stuff, right? So these are real issues, but sometimes the individual vulnerabilities, may not mean, just because say alert, they may not be anything big. But, how many people in industry are actually looking at these as they're announced? I have another one in my inbox from a month ago from a vendor who says, we have this vulnerability. Please upgrade to, firmware X." And it's like, yeah, I'm an instructor. I'm a content creator. Not a big deal for me, but big deal for, users. And typically, if you have a vector that can get into your OT network, then it could be a problem. If your OT network is locked down tight, and you have physical security, so bad actors can't walk into your facility, then you're probably okay. So just what you said just brought up so many thoughts and ideas that I wanted to throw out there. But I also wanted to say one other thing too. I want to be very clear because I know a lot of my colleagues out there are going to say risk assessment. That has to do with the safety of a system. So does your book get into that side of things at all? Hey guys, just wanted to break in here for a minute and pay some bills. If you know anybody looking for a PLC training, if the training I'm doing in the coming 3 weeks doesn't fit exactly what you need, just reach out to me. I work with multiple customers to do training right here in my office on all kinds of products. Typically, they're Rockwell or Siemens products because that's where my knowledge is. For instance, we're working with one customer that teaches their people on PLC 5s, Slick 500s, and compact and control logics, right? And so we have local customers who come in to do training on that. We also have customers that travel halfway across the country to do that as well. And it's kind of unique because I have all this varied hardware that I've been collecting for 36 years, and I have, that knowledge going back 36 years that I can train them on. Like one customer wants to do Data Highway Plus, Remote IO, Device Net, and Control Net. No problem. I got all the equipment. I can walk them through all of that. Now, with that said, if you know anybody looking for custom training or want to come to my standard courses like the 1 in 3 weeks, just have them visit theautomationschool.com. You'll see all the information right there along with my online courses. Those people who come to my in-person courses get a copy of the online course at no additional charge so they can continue their learning, maybe go through some of the more theory stuff on their own and ask me questions as well, you know, not limited to just being here in person. So in any case, if you know anybody looking for that type of training or custom training, please have them visit theautomationschool.com. And with that, let's get back to this week's episode on OT risks.
Yeah, and I'm going to come back to some of the other things you said as well.
Okay.
But yeah, let me answer that question now. So that's the other important aspect of this book that we wanted to focus on is a lot of cybersecurity risk assessment talks about compromise of servers and workstations and network devices and PLCs. That is not risk. That is not consequence. That is an incident. There's a cybersecurity incident. What it does for the organization is what the real consequence is. And as you say, safety is one of the most important things in our environment. So most operational technology usually is deployed in situations where its compromise in some way can cause a potential safety incident. So it might be harm to people, it might be impact on the environment as well, but it can also be damage to equipment and all those other things. So exactly the kind of things you would normally do in a regular PHA or HAZOP risk assessment, where you look at safety and you look at safety controls and have you got sufficient prevention controls and mitigation controls to minimize the likelihood of a safety incident and also its impact. So that's what we want people to understand, is that what you really want to be focused on is what is the real impact to my organization if I get, for instance, the examples you said, if my PLC gets compromised, um, by, for instance, like you say, these bogus SIP packets that are going on to confuse the PLC. So so now you've lost control essentially, or you've lost monitoring. That's the incident. But what is the impact? So what is that PLC doing? And what happens if that PLC is no longer operating correctly? So it could be, that your production line stops, which is potential serious financial impact to the organization. It could be controlling some process, which um, might lead to a potential loss of containment, for instance, or some other incident like that. So understanding that then helps you prioritize the risks. So like you said, the fact that you can compromise the web page on a PLC probably doesn't have any impact to the organization at all. It's an inconvenience, but it's a minor inconvenience. But the problem with it all is that it confuses people who don't spend all of their time thinking about this. It misdirects the effort, essentially. So like you said, it's understanding the perspective in this is the real critical thing. So if you tell everybody that they need to focus on patching these things and doing these things and doing these things, that's all good stuff. But are they doing the other stuff? And that's what we really want to try and get people to focus on. So I spend a lot of time with the water industry in the US, especially the rural water industry. And they have very few resources to deal with cybersecurity, but they're a critical part of the infrastructure. I mean, you can't live without water and you can't live without sewage treatment. So what I try and do with them is to focus them on that if you do these things, if you do these mitigations, then your likelihood of a serious consequence of a cybersecurity incident is minimized. I don't want them distracted, spending all of their time installing patches on Windows operating systems and things. I mean, that would be nice, but as a minimum, they really need to have a few things in place. And that's what the book tries to focus on, is prioritize the things that can have the most impact to the organization to make them more resilient, essentially. The other thing is that the other theme of the book, which you're touching on as well, is that there's a lot of guidance that's been made available either by for-profit organizations, governmental organizations, training organizations, and a lot of that guidance is totally intended to be helpful. I'm not dismissing it, but it focuses people perhaps on the wrong thing. So if you do a typical assessment today that comes from CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency, or any other sector-based risk organization in the US and outside the US, they'll give you 20 questions or 30 questions, and they're yes, no questions. So they'll say, do you do this? Do you do this? And you kind of go, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. You go all the way through that. And then the end result is you might have 15 things that you don't do. That's if you're being honest. And that's if you know that you those 15 things wrong. As you said at the beginning, a lot of people don't know what they don't know. So let's assume that everybody does know what they know, and they still come out with 15. So what do? You've got 15 things to do. How do you prioritize that? What are the most important things to do? And the problem is that they're not equal. So some of those 15 things are much more important than the others, and we're not giving that guidance. We're not saying these are the things you really have to get done. They just say this is one of 15 things you have to get done. And so it never gets done because no one has time to do these things. So this is really what we're trying to focus on in the book is, the biggest single thing you can do in any critical infrastructure organization is have an incident response plan. That's the basic. If you don't have that, I keep saying to people, you're honestly wasting your time doing all of the other stuff, patching your systems and having network monitoring in place and asset identification and all of these kind of fancy tools. They're not going to help you when you have an incident if you don't have an incident response plan. And everything comes from that. So this is this is a real concern because we've talked about this before, but I we get mixed messages about how well prepared organizations are for cybersecurity. We see it in the news regularly. Jaguar Land Rover was the most recent high profile one in the UK. They were out of operation for 2 months, I think it was, and is costing them $50 million, not pounds, a week in terms of lost production. That should not happen. I mean, it simply should not happen. A company like Jaguar Land Rover should not be in a situation where if they have a cybersecurity incident, they cannot produce their vehicles for weeks on end. I mean, they should be able to, yes, they might have to stop production and restore operation, and it might take them a day or two, but it should be as little as that. And the fact that organizations like Jaguar Land Rover still have those incidents is not reassuring at all. And I get mixed messages because people say, "Oh, you're too pessimistic." Because I've been to organizations and they're really good and they're amazing, and I say, well, there's two different parts to an organization, and I know you know this well, Sean, because you've got a lot of experience here. Is you've got the boardroom and the C-suite, where all the flashing lights are green and everything looks fantastic. And then you've got the production line and the operational side, and it's a very different world. And
What
I
I like
keep
to call
telling
the
people,
real world.
the real world, yeah. And I keep telling people, if you want to know how well an organization is doing, go to the plant floor and see how things are done there. See the stickers with the usernames and passwords on. See the fact that people leave the doors propped open. See the fact that if you ask somebody, what will you do if you have an incident, they don't know. See the fact that someone's using their personal cell phone connected to the network, and so on and so on. And see all of those things. Again, no one's being intentionally malicious. They're just not well trained, they're not well prepared, and that's what's going to bring the company down.
I think most of us we're very, and I don't know how this is in other countries, but I think in the US, most of us, we're one person, we have one way of doing things. And a lot of times we blend our who we are at home with who we are at work.
Yeah.
And, look, if you don't back up the photos on your phone, it will be sad if you lose all those pictures of the kids and grandkids, right? Or of the parents and siblings and friends and on, puppy dogs. But it's not going to burn your house down. Okay.
Mhm.
That is totally a different scale of backing up at work, right? If everybody listening to us, if you could just do one thing today besides pre-ordering his book, please make sure everything you have, he didn't ask me to say that, I just said that. Um, Back it all up. Back up every PLC, every SCADA system, every HMI. It doesn't take a long time. It's kind of like brushing your teeth. It's just something you gotta do, okay?
Mhm.
So it has to get done. I have so many stories. I remember one reseller of some of the products we all love and know. They got a ransomware and they decided they're not gonna pay it. They're like, hey, we're proud Americans. We ain't gonna pay this ransomware. So what do? Everybody had to work all weekend long to manually enter in 3 days worth of transactions off of some tapes because off of some printouts because they didn't have an up to date backup, right? One of the first things you learn when you go to service school, right? Like I did many years, probably 20 years ago, is you have to have a disaster recovery plan for your data. You have to not only make a copy, you have to take a copy off site. Because if the building burns down, you need all that data. Most companies, they say 95% of companies who don't have a backup go out of business. So I know I'm preaching to the choir, I'm sure everybody's eyes are rolling, but we can't treat our workplaces like we treat our home environments. I don't back up my home computer as much as I should. But man, if I'm in a production line that's producing millions of dollars worth of products every day, I need to make sure every device, not just the PLC, HMI, SCADA, but there may be some IoT devices that slipped in there. There may be some network switches. You all probably have experienced the joy of using the CLI, the command line interface, to set up your switch and turn this one bit on and off, and you got to back that stuff up. So we've covered on the show before products from MDT or AMDT now and products from Copia IO. Other vendors have them too. And we invite them all to come on the show as well. But I know I'm on my soapbox, I'll get back off, but backups, right? Backups, right? Because you have a good source, you need a backup when the line is running, and typically when you go to shut down for regular maintenance, that's when you do the backup. If you take a backup when the PLC, if you have a large PLC program and it's running, you're not getting all of the data that's like in one slice of time in 1 millisecond. You're getting that data over the course of however long it takes to back it up. And that in most cases doesn't cause a problem, but in some cases it can because you'll have data before and after, let's say, a line was finished. So in any case, and that is like I'm sure that's one of the things at the very top of the list
Yep.
next to don't let the internet access your plant floor. But let me now that I've passed on that PSA, let me turn it back to you. Hey everyone, I just wanted to break in here quickly and tell you about the membership program that I have. As you probably heard me say before, my biggest video was 500,000 views and it didn't even net me enough YouTube revenue to buy the PLC I was covering in that video. So that's why I moved on to doing sponsorships and memberships. And so this year I've done 5 membership only videos. Plus, we've had membership only versions of the Automation Podcast. A lot of times it's an extended version, like when Johan came on to talk to about Factory Talk View. The extended version includes some demos he did for us. That was an unsponsored episode, so we try to keep those around 30 minutes, 45 minutes. So if we go longer, we release the extended edition to our memberships. And memberships only cost, well, they start at $5 a month and you get all the videos. Whether you're at $5 or more, you'll get all the member only videos. And plus, we have a library of hundreds of previous videos as well that you get immediately when you become a member. So you can become a member for $5 a month over at YouTube or over at theautomationblog.com. And we're looking at other places as well. But those are the 2 places you can be members right now. And I want to thank all our members on both platforms. Really appreciate you guys. There are links, a membership link on both places where you can see everything we've done for members. So check those out if you are a member already and you want to just see everything that I've done for you guys, including the extended episodes and those 5 specific episodes just for members. So with that said, let's get back into this week's episode of the Automation Podcast.
Now, that's great advice. And as you said, people will roll their eyes, but honestly, then if you ask them, show me where the backups are, they'll go, oh, yeah, well, actually, yeah, we don't have, or we had an old backup or something like that, or we can't find the backup. So it's really good advice. And I want to mention something else because you said up there about don't connect your systems to the internet. Great advice, too. Now, there's a couple of things about that. Again, these assessments, when you do these assessments, people will say, "Oh, your system's connected to the internet." And I think you said at the beginning, a lot of people will say, "Oh, no, my system's not connected." And then you go, "Well, let me just have a look here." And then you find out actually it is connected. Maybe not directly connected, but indirectly connected through some other paths that no one thought about. Um, could be a vendor connection that's needed for remote access to maintain systems, and you didn't think about that, for instance. But even if you did have a totally isolated system that's completely separate from the outside world, you can still have cybersecurity incidents and you can still have consequences. One of the most famous high profile OT related cyber incidents is Stuxnet. And Stuxnet targeted a nuclear enrichment facility and that was not connected to the outside world, but it was compromised by malware, and it got in through USB drives. So everybody knows, I think these days, that those USB drives are really handy for transferring information from system to system, but they can also transfer things you don't want. Um, but it's not so much the point about the USB drive I want to emphasize, it's the fact that isolating your systems alone is not enough. You still have to have people who are aware of cybersecurity issues and things that can compromise their environment and impact their resilience. And that's a concern because a lot of people think, well, if I just disconnect, then I don't have to think about it anymore, and that's not good enough. I've had that before. I've had people come to me and say, we are not connecting the system to the internet, so we don't think we have to think about any of the cybersecurity controls you talk about. So they're going to talk about like not patching the systems. They're going to talk about not having antivirus running. They're going to talk about not having good user access. Now, all of those things mean that I could break into a facility physically. I don't have to be on the network to compromise the system. So a lot of places I've been to, and I'm sure you've seen it as well, their physical security was not great. So I can easily break into a facility, and if they have usernames and passwords on stickers, I can get into their systems and I can cause havoc. If they're not patched, I can put malware on the system and they can cause problems, and so on and so on. So um, the second thing, though, about it is, and we emphasize this in the book, is again, a lot of experts focus on the intentional or malicious cybersecurity actors. So the nation states and the organized crime groups with malware, ransomware, and hackers and script kiddies and all those kind of things. Now, obviously, I'm not dismissing them. They are real and they are a real threat. But again, the biggest threat we all know from all of the data is inadvertent or accidental compromise by an internal user. So statistics are something like 80, 85, even 90% of cybersecurity incidents today, IT or OT, are caused by people who are authorized to access systems who accidentally do something. Well, accidentally could be clicking on a phishing email, but it can also be not taking a backup. It can be sharing your username and password with someone else, or leaving your username and password on a sticker somewhere, or using a removal media when you shouldn't, or connecting your phone to the network, and all of those kind of things. So all of those inadvertent things, they are the things that cause the most incidents. And so that's the other thing in the book, is to say, well, that's why mitigation controls, the incident response and the backup that you talked about, and procedures to manage things when they do go wrong, and even mechanical fail-safes. That's another thing we haven't talked about, but that's another important part in operational technology, is
Oh,
having
absolutely.
fail-safes that are independent of the digital world, so that they can't be compromised and they can operate if needed. If you have all of those in place, even if someone makes a mistake, then your impact is minimized. That's what we're trying to do. We're not trying to, well, we are trying to stop the incident from happening. But honestly, the most important thing is to stop the consequences if the incident does happen. So,
Yeah, and I mean, I think we've all run into the fact where, maybe the supervisor leaves the HMI in a passworded screen. The operator, with no malintent, goes over and he's like, "Oh, this is wrong. I got to fix something." And now the production line makes a bunch of bad products, and there's thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars worth of costs that result from that. But it's not just things like that that we see that are very common. I mean, very experienced people, some of the smartest people I know, they're still human, and they download the wrong PLC to the wrong program to the wrong device, and
mhm,
that causes issues. Thankfully, in the instances I know, it didn't cause any physical or safety issues. But still, how are
mm,
you ensuring that somebody in an office can't download to a running line and stop that line, because that also causes safety and potentially financial issues. And then, believe it or not, guys, there was a major, this kind of goes back to the COVID time, but it happened again recently. There was a major pharmaceutical, who I won't name, but they're located on the East Coast, who mixed two totally separate vaccines together. Now, these vaccines are not identical. They're not supposed to be mixed. They're not supposed I know there's multi-vaccines that you can take these days, but these two, you still can't take them together because they do the same thing and it's not advised that, but they mixed them together. Thank goodness they found it before they started shipping out the products. But even I remember hearing a story out of Japan at around that time where they were getting the vials and they were full of black metal chunks. And they're like, send them all back. Right. So these are real things that happen in the real world. And so it's not just, you know, the operator got to the wrong screen and he was able to do something wrong. But these are the things that happen, even with experienced users accessing the wrong control system or the wrong network. I do it, but I'm in a classroom, so the damage is very minimal. But in a production line where people's well-being and millions of dollars are at stake, it's very important.
yeah, I once did a assessment with a company in the US. I won't say who it was and where, but we talked about human error. And we talked about how it's important to have written procedures that people can follow, so they reduce the likelihood of making mistakes. And their comment was, "We don't need procedures because we never make mistakes." That's literally what they said. And That's
That
that
is
is
the
the
recipe.
recipe. Yeah. But honestly, that's some people think that they think, well, we won't make mistakes, or worse, we rely on the technology. The technology we've got technology that operates a facility. Then we add technology to support us in operating the facility, and now we add technology to protect us against cybersecurity. And a lot of people rely heavily on the technology to prevent the issue, right? So they'll say, well, we've got network monitoring in place and we've got firewalls in place and we've got all these other things in place. So I don't need to worry about security anymore because technology will take care of it. And as we've just talked about, most of the issues are to do with humans, and humans can unintentionally bypass some of those things. And so technology is not going to save you either. It's just going to make it worse. And that technology is also vulnerable to cybersecurity incidents because it has software and firmware that can be has vulnerabilities in it as well. So it's it's a never-ending problem.
That brings up something else I wanted to mention too, and it's about the physical security or physical safety, right? And I know there's a lot of people out there know more about this than I do, but I was recently working, probably in the last year, working with a customer who needed help program a system. He was changing a conveyor system that would ingest pallets to be a place where pallets would be parked and then taken off by the forklift. And I'm like, where's your physical stop? He's showing me a picture of it. I'm like, where's the physical? He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, if you're standing there and that photo eye doesn't come on for whatever reason, maybe you bumped it, unplugged it, disconnected it, that pallet full of extremely heavy products is going to land on you, on your legs, and you could be crippled. Where's your physical stop? We can't rely on the photo eye to always stop that pallet of very heavy equipment to save you. And matter of fact, I would never stand even with the physical stops. I won't stand there. You need a big caution sign on the ground. And that's where the experts come in and they do risk evaluations and all that. But it's even physical things like that, that people who are building new systems, they're putting a lot of thought into that. They're getting safety contracted, safety PLCs, safe talk off, and all these great features. But on legacy systems that have been maybe modified, changed, or upgraded, sometimes those are the things that they may not look at. And that's another reason why they may want to read your book to learn about those things.
Yeah, it's a fantastic point because, like we were just saying, I mean, the technology. Yeah, you can have this amazing technology that has these features and it's specially designed to do these things and to prevent these things from happening and so on and so on. But again, it can be configured wrong, it can be programmed wrong, it can have a cybersecurity incident that can cause some issue with it. And that's why you need those fallbacks, those fail safes that are in place. And that's what scares me is that you understand that because of all your experience, and I understand that. But there's a generation of people now who don't necessarily have that knowledge because they have been in the technology world since they were born, and they trust technology completely, and they don't think about what happens when there's no technology at all, and they don't think about some of those implications. And like I say, if you look at those assessments that talk about cybersecurity, they don't mention any of that kind of stuff at all. We talk about how you limit access and how you monitor networks and how you're doing all of this kind of technical stuff. But they fail to think about what the operational world, the real world, as you said, how is that working and how is that protected? And that, by definition, is the biggest problem, the biggest concern we have in any of these facilities. The drugs you mentioned, the recalls of product, the wasted money, the damage to equipment, all of those things. These are the things that people need to worry about. And then, if you understand how to mitigate that, then you'll manage cybersecurity well. That's the way I look at it, rather than let's manage cybersecurity and probably we'll fix this, but we're not really sure.
Yeah. And, it's kind of like for anybody younger who's just coming into the industry, it's like, if you want to understand what we're talking about, take a look at recalls on cars, right? Look at the details, right? So these are companies, most of whom have been in business for over a century. And every year, well, most of their products have recalls on them. And some of them are pretty serious. My wife had a car, SUV, I won't say the name, but the electric seat inside burnt up to a crisp. Thankfully, she was never hurt. She just was very cold in the winter until she got a fix. And that didn't hit the recall right away. So there are serious issues that can happen. And if you kind of want to, you know, we have companies that are some of the most high-tech companies, both in manufacturing and in the products they make, the car probably being the second most expensive thing you'll ever buy after a house, right? Um, and they have recalls all the time. Most people don't realize it. They don't get them noticed in the mail. Maybe they moved, maybe they're not paying attention. It goes with the junk mail, right? But so these are some of the biggest companies, most advanced companies making some of the most technological products in the world, and they're making mistakes all the time. And there's so many OEMs that send products to those vendors. It's not just them. It's such a huge supply chain behind them. And so that's what we're talking about. That happens in automation all the time. It doesn't just have to be a Windows issue or a virus issue. It could be the vendor. If you look at just like cars have recalls, every single vendor has had patches, right? There's no vendor that doesn't have a patch. Things go wrong. Sometimes they're minor little things, sometimes they're major. But yeah, mistakes happen all the time. We're fortunate that most of them don't result in anything major, but you just can't. It's just like not backing up your hardware, your programs. You can't just say, unless you're owning a company, you shouldn't say if you have any type of integrity, you shouldn't say, we're just going to fly by the seat of our pants. No, these things happen, and I hopefully for anybody younger just getting into the industry, just take a look at your recalls on cars, and you'll see this happens all the time. And I wanna talk about AI too, because my wife and I had this conversation this morning about how AI makes lots of mistakes, and I know everybody keeps asking me, "Hey, is there an AI yet that can write my PLC program for me?" And I'm like, "There's so many problems with all the AI systems we have right now, you wanna trust it with your PLC code?" So, go ahead. You said you had something in the book on that as well. You guys considered that.
Yeah. Well, that's a great example. So I think the approach to AI that we have today is basically the same approach that we've just talked about with all the other things. There's so much trust, unplaced trust in AI, and that's what scares me. AI itself doesn't scare me. It's people's inherent trust and inability to see the failure modes of AI is what concerns me. And I've seen people say, "Well, we shouldn't use AI at all in industrial environments," and I'm like, "Well, no, I don't agree with that either. I think AI has a great place to help operators, reduce their workload by helping them with decision support and managing alarms and things like that. That it can have a huge impact. It can have an impact on optimization of production and operations and many things. But what you can't do is just give over all of your trust to something and say, like you said, give me a PLC program and I'll download it and run it. So, but we have got, again, it's just the nature of the way we are today. We are told that, AI is going to solve all of our problems. And so, and you can see it can generate programs. I mean, I've used it to generate some scripts and things and it works. But I wouldn't put them on a production environment without rigorous testing like it would apply to anybody's program. Um, the other thing about AI, I think, which is a problem from a security point of view, is the opaqueness of AI decision making, right? So you don't know, like if it gives you a decision, if it gives you some information, or if it gives that to a system, you don't necessarily know how it made that decision. You don't know the weightings that are involved in that decision making, and this is a real problem, right? So you can have potentially a great answer that maybe a human didn't think about because they've got more information that they processed to get that answer, but you don't know. And how do you know? Because you don't know how it came up with the answer. And the hallucination thing that is probably the biggest concern with AI, that that comes into play here. The fact that it can take a bunch of information and then produce a completely uh, out of nowhere response because it um, usually doesn't have sufficient information to be able to produce the right result. So it kind of just makes something up. Now, we need to obviously find a way to stop that from happening and to give more visibility to weightings and algorithms that are used in AI so people can have confidence. But I think ultimately it comes down to you've always got to have a human in the loop. So, i.e., you can have AI, but you can have it give information to a user who then has enough knowledge and experience to use that result and determine for themselves whether that's a good idea. And then also human on the loop, i.e., monitoring things and saying, is it correct? Because all the things I just explained, the problem now is with cybersecurity, all I need to do now is to somehow get into some large language model or whatever machine learning algorithm that they've got. And maybe I influence the result, or I change the weightings, or I change something that gives fake results. Now, it might be uh, so sophisticated that you don't even notice. You just change a process variable by a tiny amount, and you don't realize until later that it's a problem. Or you can change things dramatically and completely hold the process. But that's obviously another concern. And the fact that these large language models and environments don't usually exist on premise, they might be in the cloud. Again, you've got little control over that. They might be shared environments, so people are also using them and ingesting information into them, and you don't know. So there's just so many unknowns with it that I don't even know where to begin. But I certainly wouldn't rule out using it, as I said, but under the right circumstances.
Yeah, I found AI can be extremely helpful, so much better than just a standard search engine. Although search engines can be quicker for certain types of information you need, right? Like, what's the next holiday coming up, right? Or, hey, what date is Easter on this year? I've done that before. Um,
Yeah.
you just want to, and you get your voice boxes. I've muted mine, thankfully, but sometimes I'll ask my voice box to tell me, the voice assistant, hey, it's going to rain today. So much easier to do that than use AI. But, I had a database I was migrating from one system to another, and it needed to be had to have some it needed to be modified to work in the new system. And it was able to help me. I made a couple of false starts, but that's okay. I gave it the error message and then it corrected it, say, okay, that's not going to work. I just looked deeper into it, and with that version, it doesn't have that feature, so we can't do what I gave you to do, right? So, but I tell people it's like, look, when you search using a search engine, you don't believe every result you get. When you go on social media, you don't believe everything you see. And I'm not just talking about deep fakes. I'm talking, my wife would tell me stories, headlines on social media. That's totally not true. So and so has died. She's like, he didn't die, you know? Or so and so is now was elected for this, and it's like, no, they didn't even run. So we have that skepticism built into us. We need to have skepticism. I know AI is new, but we have to have skepticism with AI too. And we need to trust but verify. I asked AI this morning. I said, look, I need something that'll do this. Who offers services to do this? And it gave me a bunch of options. All of those options were out of my price range. I mean, thousands of dollars versus hundreds of dollars. And so, it was tricked by the verbiage, "Oh, it comes out to only a couple of pennies a month, but you have to give us thousands of dollars up front." And so it didn't know any better. And so it thought, hey, it's only pennies a month. But, we got to go look at AI with skepticism. And even more so, I asked AI, one of the popular AIs, to draw me a stop circuit the other day for a PLC. One of the simplest things that I know Copia and Schneider and I think it's Design Studio and others do very well. And it put the ceiling branch in the wrong place. And I'm like, all right, you're ceiling what? And so yeah, so we gotta have healthy skepticism. Doesn't mean don't use the tool. Just like like a template in Word. You want to write a letter. Maybe you want to write a letter thanking somebody for visiting your office. There's templates out there you can get, and they'll give you a good start. But you're not just gonna tell your voice assistant, hey, send them a letter. Unless you already gave it a template that you like with all the fields to fill in, because it may send, happy birthday for all you know. And that could be very embarrassing if it wasn't the person's birthday. So yeah, we gotta use the tools, use every tool we have, learn which ones are practical for what tasks, and then always verify, because these this generative stuff isn't always going to be accurate. And I know people who follow this stuff, they could think of a bunch of silly examples where people said, show me this president or show me that singer, and they get something totally not related. So But in any case, what other things did you cover in your book? I don't want to keep you all day, but are there any other topics that you guys covered in the book that you want to share before we end the show?
I think we covered most of it. I think the main kind of closing point is just about what we've talked about throughout this, which is it's a lot of a cultural aspect that we need to improve in organizations in risk management. It's not we know how to do risk management. There are ways to do risk management. There are controls that we can deploy to make people secure and safe. All of that exists. But what we don't have today, still, despite all of the years of doing this, is the right culture in organizations that says cybersecurity is just another part of resilience. It's just another part of safe operation. And if we can instill that from the C suite all the way down to the shop floor with everybody, then I think we'll be in a good shape for our critical infrastructure everywhere. But unfortunately, we're still a long way off that. And I think part of the reason is there are vendors who are selling products and they want to focus on selling what they do. There are consultants who want to focus on what they do. And then you've got the asset owners and the organizations who have the risk who are just bewildered with all the guidance. So the governmental, non-governmental guidance and the vendors and consultants, and they don't even know where to begin. And so this is why, again, another shout out to you and what you do, Sean, because you help educate people. And that's nothing more important than that in our industry is to keep people up to date and up to speed with what's happening and to point them in the right direction. That is the most important thing we can do for our sectors, I think.
Well, I want to thank you, but really, what I do is just ask people like you to come on the show and share your knowledge. So I want to thank you and all our guests. I think we're in 260 or 270 episodes now. But without the guests, I mean, the show would be pretty boring. So thank you, Steve, for coming on the show and all your colleagues and all the folks over at the ISA as well. And, just everybody's out there. And I just want to throw it out there to vendors, to consultants, to anybody who has something that you think you want to share with the audience. Just contact me about coming on. And so, if you go to the website insightsia.net, my new website, you'll see that kind of broken the shows into 7 different categories, product overviews, sit down talks, discussions, and whatnot. So in any case, I just talked to a vendor who has a new product out. So exciting. Talked to them last night, so I'm excited to get them on. But yeah, it's being a one-man show. It's difficult to try to reach out to vendors and get all the vendors on. So anybody out there can help if you're talking to your vendor, or if you work at a vendor, or somebody who should come on, like a consultant, or somebody who wrote a book about industrial automation, or somebody who's involved in this field, or with an organization or whatever. Just contact me directly. We'd love to get you on. And Steve, I want to thank you again. So interesting. So give us the name of the book here as we close out, the name of the book, and tell us where it's going to be available.
So the book is titled Risk Management for Operational Technology Systems. It's published by Taylor and Francis, and it comes out 30th of April. It's in hardback. It comes out in paperback at the end of the year. It's available on Amazon in hardback, and I think there will be a um, Kindle or similar version at some point as well. Um, so looking forward to people reading it and commenting on it and seeing what people think about what we've said.
And Steve has given me some links. So I'll put those in the description so you guys can click on that. If you're driving, you don't have to wait till you can get, you're not driving. Please don't shop for books while you're driving.
Yep.
Uh, in any case, I want to thank Steve again. I want to thank our audience for tuning in and really appreciate it, Steve. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Sean. I appreciate it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode, and I want to thank Steve for coming back on the show and talking to us about his new book and OT risks. I thought it was very interesting. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I want to thank Steve for coming on the show. Also want to thank all our members who pay $5 a month or more to get exclusive videos and overviews, like our new Compact Logix 5390 overview and unboxing of a brand new Micro 800 starter pack and other things as well. And we got new ones coming up. I'm going to be doing a video for our members on V38 in the coming weeks. I'm also preparing for my class. If you know anybody who needs basic PLC training, tell them to go over to theautomationschool.com/live and they'll learn about my upcoming course. in which you can choose just to learn one PLC for the week, or you can choose to learn up to 3 different PLCs that week. And as I showed earlier in the video, I have my office set up to do lectures so we can have quiet in the lab room as the different groups come for different lectures. So with that said, I also do custom training, as I mentioned earlier. So if you need training on, maybe you do need Compact Logics training, but you also want some ControlNet training, or you need some PLC5 training, or Slick 500 training, or MicroLogix training, or DeviceNet training, just contact me directly. We'll put together a custom quote for you to come out here and do that training right here and get your people up to speed. We can do as little as 2 people at a time. A lot of places like that. They like to just send 2 people in, do some custom training, and then they can rotate through their entire maintenance staff without so many people at one time. So that always seems to work out well, but we can do up to 8, whatever you need. And with that, I want to thank you all for tuning in. I want to wish you all good health and happiness. And until next time, my friends, peace.